Hi everyone, I hope you're well. I wanted to mention some albums that have changed or influenced my music taste over time since I have started listening to music in general. Not exactly, you obviously are exposed to music since you're a child and everything. But ever since I started to consciously, seek out new music to listen to, there's been a few artists and albums and songs that have changed my view on what music is and what it can be. These aren't actually in the order that I listen to them in. It's not really chronological, or it's not really in order of importance either. And the first one that I wanted to talk about is Non So Vile by Cryptopsy.
I do that rather well, don't you think?
This album is like the kind of music that has people asking you whether you really like that or you're just pretending to like it. Because people often think there's no way that anyone actually listens to that because they want to. Clearly, people sometimes think that if you listen to certain types of music, it's not because you like them, but because you want to shock people or what have you. Which is a whole nother discussion altogether. But now, one of the criticisms that I've heard of this song is that the songs just sound of this album is that the songs sound too much like each other. There's not a lot of variety, which is kind of true in the sense that, they do kind of sound like each other. When you listen to the album as a whole, you kind of start to lose the feeling of where in the album you are or which song that is. So I will say that's a type of valid criticism that I have found. Another issue that people seem to have is that they just don't like Lord Worm's vocals. They think that the vocals have nothing to do with the lyrics, and the lyrics might as well not be there. That's kind of something similar to what I felt when I first listened to it. I was like, why are there even lyrics if the guy is just kind of doing his own thing altogether? But if you listen to certain songs while you read the lyrics, you can tell that he's really saying that. There's actually a few phrases here and there that are clearly him saying those words. Slit your guts. You can hear him say, cry for me. You can hear him say those words. Maybe the first time around, it's not like you actually hear those words coming from him, but when you have the lyrics as context and stuff, you kind of do start to realize that they are based on that the sounds he's making are at least based on the lyrics, and sometimes are very much precisely what is on the lyrics. Also, some people had issues with the production because apparently maybe the drums are too loud, or some people actually had the opposite, or some people actually said the opposite about the production, that it was precisely the way it was supposed to be. I think that sometimes it's not really the drums particularly that are too loud. Everything else sometimes is too loud in comparison to the guitar. The guitar is really hard to hear at points where you would actually want to listen to it. I say that as if, you wouldn't want to listen to it otherwise. But what I mean is, there are moments in which it is doing something interesting, but you hear all of the other instruments overpowering it. Before I liked this album, I couldn't really get into those incomprehensible vocals that I was like, okay, they're not very clear. There's no real relation between those and the lyrics. And sometimes the point is just not the lyrics, but rather the voice is, a sort of instrument, and the lyrics are just kind of secondary. And also, the album is much less noisy than it appears at first glance or at first listen. It first seems that just there's a section of music and then there's another one that has no relation to the previous one, or sometimes it seems that the instruments are kind of each of the instruments is just kind of doing its own thing. But after I listened to it more carefully, I started to notice that it wasn't actually noisy. It sounds unhinged and chaotic, but it's not noisy. Sometimes you just want to listen to something like that, something that sounds that strongly chaotic, even though it does have a structure. Next one is Lisa Germano, Geek the Girl.
I always liked
which I mentioned on my previous video already, but I didn't really go on detail about what I thought exactly of it. Like I said, it feels really vulnerable and really naked, and I mean that with all the connotations. It's a sort of coming of age album. It's about being a teenage girl, but in a sort of dark sense. She herself says that she intended it to be just about, a lighthearted album about being a teen girl, but it just ended up being much darker than that. Some of the songs have a sort of ironically happy sound to them, and some of them are a bit more straightforward and direct in how they are. They kind of sound more sinister or more sad or maybe a little bit angry. And at many times, she helps that sort of vulnerable sound herself, because she's often whispering or softly speaking the lyrics rather than, singing them in a more secure way, or, a bit a more confident way. But even the more ironic parts are very genuine, because it feels like someone admitting that they have flaws and that they have problems. And it's like she went back to look at her teenage years and went, okay, I was a teenager and I was naive or stupid sometimes, but I can forgive myself for that, because teenagers are that way. They are immature and they are naive sometimes. They do things that sometimes they can look back and be embarrassed about, or they go through things that are embarrassing to think of or to talk about, and things that are more, pretty much everything is more intense and more significant to your life if it happens to you when you're a child or a teenager. So what's very special about this album is a song that actually made me discover the entire album, which is A Psychopath. What's interesting about this song, two things. One, the fact that it can barely be considered a song. I'm not sure that I myself would entirely confidently call it a song. Some people that I have shown the song to have said that it is not really a song, and there's also reviewers and commenters online who have no issue calling it a song, and they don't really question the musicality of that piece, because there is a melody going on, there's other sounds, and she is singing, but it has some noises here and there. At some points you may think that it's really more of a collection of sounds than anything else.
A baseball bat, a sting, a mace.
It kind of, I guess, makes me question what music really is. The way that some people do when they listen to more extreme things like Japanese noise. Another thing about this song is that it's scary. I can't listen to this song at night with the lights off. It just can't do it. And that doesn't really happen with any other song. No other song really scares me, because there's songs that have horror themes, and there's also songs, not exactly songs, but there's dark ambience or creepy sounds, sound effects and stuff like that. But I'm talking about something that is both a song and actually scares you with its sounds and with its lyrics and things like that. This song is the one that I have listened to that I can say actually is scary. Next one is Death Symbolic. And this is something that this is the hardest one for me to write down, because I just don't know what to say about it. I even read some other reviews, and it seems that a lot of people just don't know what exactly to say about it, because you hear it and it's a different experience. I heard it for the first time when I was 11, I'm pretty sure, and before I heard this album I had no idea what music really was and what it could be, what it could sound like, because it's both harsh and beautiful. It has some aspects and moments that are much more delicate than you might expect from this genre. And you know, I've liked other albums of the same genre from death metal, not before, but after this one, I have been impressed by other albums. This album does something that just others don't, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily the best of death metal. Even when I listen to different types of melodic death metal or things like Opeth, I don't get the same experience than listening to Symbolic. I mean, I have liked albums, maybe there's albums that I would say I like even more than this one that are also death metal, but they all do something completely different. You know, the mood that happens in this album is something that I don't think I've ever seen replicated in any other album. Next one is Modest Mouse. This is a long drive for someone with nothing to think about. So this is an album that I listened to and I was okay with it at first. You know, I was like, okay, good album, I guess. Mostly I like drumming. I thought it was a cute song, you know. And for the most part, the artist as a whole, the band, was just kind of okay. So I just kept listening to some of their other albums, and then I found a list ranking all of their songs. And I started to understand how, you know, he was ranking things mostly based on the lyrics, and I started to notice then that their lyrics were actually very good. You know, they were not the kind of lyrics that I was used to hearing or reading. They were a sort of daily life kind of poetry, you know, something very removed from the lyrics that you usually find in metal, which are a bit more grandiose, and sometimes, you know, they talk about things that are generally pretty removed from what an individual, you know, experiences in their life. These lyrics aren't just very personal, they're also really interesting in what they're proposing and what they're trying to say, but they're using very simple terms to say it, you know, complex ideas but more simple words. And especially their earlier work has a sort of, you know, thing where it feels like it wasn't too edited and it's not very sophisticated, but that actually adds to the albums, especially, like I said, the earlier ones. It gives it a pretty charming feel that is there in Geek the Girl, for example, but on Geek the Girl, her singing is a bit more nice to listen to, I guess. Isaac Brock doesn't exactly, well, at least not in the earlier works, he's often just kind of screaming and shouting some things. But again, that's, even though he doesn't sound at that moment, he doesn't sound like he knows what he's doing, it comes off as if he was doing it purposefully, you know, because he wanted to create that atmosphere to the album. The last one that I'm going to mention right now is going to be The Cure, Pornography. So the first time I listened to this album, I had a pretty vague idea of what gothic rock and gothic music were. My idea was closer to something like First and Last and Always. To me, Pornography was a bit more inaccessible and not having particularly catchy songs. I kind of had to listen to it more than a few times for me to end up having it as one of my favorite albums of all time. Which now I would say I might like it more than I do First and Last and Always, but I guess that depends on the year, on the day, you know. And it's not like I thought it was bad music at first, but I just thought of it as way too ugly sounding for me to really listen to that more than a few times. And now I consider it an ugly sounding album, I could say, but that's more of a compliment than anything else. This album really this album really gives me the idea that the person behind it was really kind of at their lowest, which I'm not necessarily talking about Robert Smith himself, but you know, just the mood that the album is trying to give me, or that it ends up giving me. It definitely seems is coming from someone who's consumed by guilt or shame, and they have kind of been disappointed by the world. They don't know how to feel about the world or how to feel about people anymore, and now they're isolating themselves, and they aren't able to keep maintaining their relationships and their friendships, and so they become isolated. I now really like the fact that this album is so unapologetically aggressive to the listener. If I didn't like the album, I would probably say that it's too obvious, or it's over the top, or it's lacking subtlety in how it's depressing. And I'm saying that because I've seen some reviews actually say that like this is too, melodramatic or something, but I feel like the reason why this doesn't come off as melodramatic to me is because it feels so genuine. And I know that I've been giving that, that sense and been using that word or similar words before about the other albums that I mentioned before. There are some other albums, Let's think of Nico Desert Shore, which obviously is much older than this The Cure album. But Desert Shore feels like it was made by someone who wanted to elicit a particular mood and feeling, give a certain artistic feel to their album. It feels much more like it was made to be that way. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, and in fact I actually really like Desert Shore, but Nico feels like she, put those words together and made the music to specifically have an album that would sound that way, which again is not a bad thing, but it comes off a bit more planned than something like this album, like Pornography. And in albums like The Marble Index or Desert Shore, some of the lines either seem too metaphorical to the point where they seem like they don't really make sense, or they're just kind of word salad. Probably because she was consuming substances and everything, and I'm guessing that Robert Smith was probably doing that too. But his lyrics in this album don't feel that way. They feel like they're coming from someone who is completely sober, and they're just being incredibly honest with themselves and with other people in that moment. Honest about things that for most people would be embarrassing to think or talk about, like guilt or shame, like I mentioned, or becoming disappointed or depressed with people, or starting to see the world in a way that is too pessimistic and that other people don't want to hear you talk about. So in a way, this album is aggressive because of that, because it tries to convince you that the world is much more bleak than you probably want to think of it as. But it also does have a little bit of hope near the end when it says that there could be a cure to be found for the sickness. And so this album is just incredibly transparent, and it feels so lucid in a way that maybe even other gothic rock albums don't feel. Those are some of the albums that have especially changed my music taste throughout my time in this world listening to music. And so I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see each other, or I guess I will see you, or I guess you will see me on the next one. Bye.